It's been one hell of a week in the news with so much going on, talking about tariffs, politicians going way far astray with their comments. So I thought I'd kind of start wrapping things up. So one of the biggest things that happened this week was the fact that President Trump did acknowledge the fact that there's going to be tariffs put on automotive parts as well as automobiles coming into the United States to the tune of 25%. Now, one of the things that as a Canadian, we need to break down a few things because the actual tariff itself isn't quite what it seems to be. I've mentioned before in one of my other posts, the devil's in the details. So before everybody loses their mind about all of a sudden Canadian cars going through the roof that are being sent and exported to the United States, the breakdown isn't what everybody thinks. So the White House did come out with the actual plan itself, and they did recognize the fact that we do already have a trade agreement in place. So before Canadian-built cars or partially built cars, because Canada doesn't build an entire car itself, they're going to try to determine how many parts were actually manufactured in Canada versus the United States. So before everybody sits there and starts going, the sky is falling, the truth of the matter is that they're going to figure out, okay, how much of Canadian content is in a car. Well, if you were to turn around and actually do the numbers, and there's a few experts that did weigh in on this, it's only a couple $1,000s. So 25% on a couple $1,000, a car could cost maybe $500 more. Now, I know there's going to be a few people that are going to say, jump up and down and say, well, wait a minute, Todd, that's not how it works. But the truth is that before everybody, reacts and starts, going crazy and starting tariff for tariff, which we don't need a tariff for, then perhaps we need to see, what we're truly looking at. And remember, these dates are always moving. So here's what, the existing leader of the Liberal Party, and I'm going to call him a non-elected prime minister because this is exactly what this guy is. He's merely the head of the Liberal Party, and he has dissolved government. So quite frankly, he should not say anything on Canada's behalf, but he still decided to step both feet in it yesterday.
Our biggest challenge as a country is becoming the most urgent. Over the coming weeks, months, and years, we must fundamentally reimagine our economy. We will need to ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
Wow. You know what? I just want to let all Americans, and I'd love to know that if Donald Trump would listen to my podcast, but the truth is, he's not speaking for Canada. I want to be very, very clear. Mark Carney is not speaking for Canada. He has no right to. Yes, they call him a sitting prime minister. He's a non-elected prime minister. Right now, we are going to an election. He should not have any power to engage with anybody at this time unless it's an emergency, and this is not an emergency as by definition. He is creating an emergency by his reactions. And this is part of the problem here, is that we've been requested to do certain things. His government will not even address it. He will not even reach out to President Trump. Or perhaps President Trump doesn't want to talk to him. I understand that. I mean, I don't want to talk to him either. And he is not our prime minister, non-elected. I'm going to go backwards for a second. And, Carney wants to sit there and say that a lot of his claim to fame. First and foremost, do you know his family does not reside in Canada? You would think that a prime minister of the country would have his family reside in the country that he is the prime minister of. But no, they actually live in Manhattan. I'm sorry, United States. Yes, it's true. He goes back and forth, runs around on jets, and yet he's the guy that's always contemplating destroying, everything because of carbon footprint. But he is probably, in the world, one of the highest users of carbon. His footprint is brutal. That's why they call him Carbon Carney, right? Now, a couple other things I'm going to tell you is that I think that I'm going to call him coattail riding Carney. And the reason why I bring this up is that back when the world went through an economic, crisis, and it was an economic crisis back in 2008, 2009. Everybody remembers the meltdown? Well, this gentleman became the head of the Bank of Canada at that time, and everybody's sitting there saying that he guided us through the tough economic times. Bullshit. I call BS on this because that's not true. There was a finance minister in place by the name of Jim Flaherty. Jim Flaherty has been recognized as probably one of the greatest finance ministers in the history of the country, and he was actually the one who helped Canada navigate through it. So again, coattail riding Carney is sitting there hopping on everything that somebody else has done and claiming it for his own. Well, here he is. He's now, hopped off the coattails of Justin Trudeau, who, by the way, is leaving a wreck of a country. And now he's sitting there saying, oh, no, we're going to do everything different. Yeah, but you were the one encouraging our current situation. So this week has really turned around and shown us a lot about our Canadian politicians. And the fact is that the current leader of the Liberal Party, who's vying to become the Prime Minister, is truly not looking out for Canadians' best interests. There's one other guy that's not looking out for Canadian best interests because he sits there and he thinks that a bully tactic is the way to go. And that's Premier Doug Ford. And this is what Doug said this week.
But I can assure you one thing. We're going to make sure that we inflict as much pain as possible to the American people without inflicting pain on the Canadian population.
That's disgusting. You know what? When you sit there and you want to turn around and actually make a statement that you want to inflict on American people, just so you know, Doogie, in our minds, you are worse than any other leader that we've seen because it's not trying to inflict pain on people. Why would you do that? One minute you're sitting there making a statement that, you love Americans and they're our neighbors and they're our friends. And next minute you're trying to declare that, Mr. Tough Guy, we're going to inflict pain on them. Look, this is part of the rhetoric that's been floating around and nobody wants to actually deal with the root cause and actually have it happen. Now, the one thing about this guy also is the fact that his relationship with an opposite party member. So here he is declaring that he's had an incredible relationship with Chrystia Freeland. We went through a lot of battles together. I think Doug's missing the platform here. So Doug, I thought you were a conservative, but you're sitting there wanting to endorse probably the worst finance minister we've ever had, former deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland, and you're sitting there, applauding her. So I'm going to give you a quick prediction. Quite frankly, Doug Ford is not a conservative. He is a liberal. And I think what he's doing is he's setting himself up for years in advance so he can run for prime minister as a liberal. Because right now, he's certainly not doing it as a conservative. So Doug, you know what? Check yourself. You weren't voted in as a liberal. We don't want a liberal mandate here in Ontario. What we need to do is get people that are worrying about Canadians. Doug, this is one of the most important things. And Mark, you know what? We know you don't care about Canada. You have the World Economic Forum stamp right on your forehead. You're telling us what you're going to do to us. You have done this around the world. The fact that you're sitting there talking about, distancing yourself from the United States. Look, Canada needs to become independent. We know that. We need to do more for ourselves. Folks, as Canadians, it's time to make a true choice. Has the existing government, and it is the existing government, unfortunately, for the last 10 years, done anything for Canada? We went through an economic boom, and yet we're more in debt than we've ever been. We're in bigger trouble, no housing, no clear direction, and yet they want to come back in for another 4 years of ruining Canada. This is a really important decision for people to make at this time. I'd love to hear your comments on this stuff because it's very important that as Canadians, we all get on the same page. Okay? The existing government is very clearly not looking out for Canada. They can sit there, it's lip service. If their lips are moving, they're lying at this time, and we all know it. What we need is somebody that's actually going to turn around and focus on individual Canadians, focus on manufacturing, looking at what we can do to be more independent. Let's utilize oil. Let's get pipelines going. Let's actually turn around and progress our country. You know, Danielle Smith out of Alberta has some pretty good ideas, and I know there's going to be a love-hate relationship with her, but at least she's smart enough to know that, look, we need to work with our trade partners, not alienate them. Right now, that's existing, and it's happening with our existing government. Anyways, like I said, how I wrap this up every single week, as a Canadian, I hope that everybody is watching out for themselves, their neighbors, their family, their children, and the next generation. Love to hear your comments. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Todd C. Slater.